Ladies and gentlemen, this RadeonTech.com video, we're going to be going through the daily happenings in the tech industry, primarily focused of course on gaming. There have been a few interesting developments, primarily as usual in the graphics market, since of course we're waiting for both Polaris and Nvidia's Pascal architecture. So, on the spirit of such events, we're going to be discussing the fact that AMD are going to be previewing the Polaris architecture on March the 14th. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The Fury X2 is actually going to be named Radeon Pro Duo, and there's going to be some significant changes to what we originally anticipated the card to be. And then finally, we're going to move over to Nvidia, because the CUDA code is actually running on Radeon and other vendors' GPUs and CPUs actually. We'll get into that in just one moment. So, starting things out with the Polaris architecture, AMD are going to be previewing it at their live event known as Caspian. Now, we're not exactly sure what AMD are going to be showing off during the event. There are multiple different possibilities. The first is that it could actually be live silicon, which is obviously the best possible outcome, and the others are potentially some, maybe technical preview, maybe some slides, that type of thing, but we're not really sure yet. Now, what is quite interesting, however, is that AMD are being rather aggressive about this, and it's only just a few days away now. As I said, Caspian is going to be happening on just March the 14th, and it's going to be streamed via Ustream, so definitely go ahead and check that out, because I certainly will be. Now, moving on to the second piece of news in regards to AMD, and that would be the Radeon Pro Duo. Now, if this one's come out of the blue to you, you're not the only one, because many in the tech industry are like, what the hell? Suffice to say, the Radeon Pro Duo is the artist formerly known as the R9 Fury X2, also known as the Fiji Gemini, also known as the dual GPU, also known as, I'm pretty sure it's gone under every single name in the history of mankind at this point. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, what we expected is essentially a downclocked version of the Fury X, by which I mean same number of shaders, same number of ROPs, same amount of texture mapping units, same amount of RAM, same clock speed on the RAM, and so on and so on. The main primary difference is, once again, a lower clock speed on the actual core. So we expected it to be around the 750 MHz range. Most numbers that I'm hearing banded around are around 730-ish. But that is the case, however, there is something that's very different. The interesting part is that AMD are marketing it to be an almost cross between the Radeon lineup and the Fire Pro lineup. If you're not familiar with the Fire Pro lineup, I guess I can give you the Cliff Notes version. It is essentially AMD's answer to the Quadro chips. Basically, these are cards which are aimed at the professional market. So whether that's CAD, whether that's 3ds Max, whether it's Photoshop, Maya, you get the idea, I don't need to keep going through this. Essentially, it's for those who need higher levels of compute performance, but they don't typically do, at least the professional level cards, they don't typically work so well with, let's say, trying to run Quake 4. Well, Quake 4 is pretty old now, but you get the idea. Now, what's quite interesting about all of this is, theoretically, this would mean that AMD have a bit of a competitor to the earlier versions of the Titan lineups. Now, what my personal feeling is with this particular GPU is AMD are marketing it towards being the fastest virtual reality experience that you can currently get. Logically, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, especially since AMD have marketed it with the various VR development systems, that this card is also going to be great for virtual reality developers. In other words, game designers who are saying, hey, I want to create my game, or maybe might work on my engine from the ground up with virtual reality in mind. What this also probably means is that in the future, we should see a situation where AMD could potentially be going down this road with their cards as well. Now, AMD have done fairly well when it comes to compute performance thanks to the GCN architecture, and we all know about that, but it's possible that they will also create these, I guess you could say, half retail-based SKUs. Now, that's not a particularly technical way of putting things, but that's kind of what the early Titans were. They were meant for folks who, yes, did a lot of gaming, but they were also aimed at individuals who maybe, once again, did a lot of exporting in Premiere or a lot of Maya work or what have you. So it's kind of that halfway house, which is one of the reasons that the pricing was so much more expensive on those cards, because A, it had a lot of VRAM and all of that, but it also allowed applications to run at not quite the same level of Quadro or anything like that, but it was still pretty aggressive. Finally, the Radeon Pro Duo supposedly has a very similar cooler to the Fury X, but obviously a little bigger, and it will suck up a lot of energy. Now, we're not exactly sure how much energy it's going to require, but reports are banding about that it's going to take 3 power connectors which are 8 pin. So I'll say that one more time. 3 power connectors which are 8 pin. So you can probably do a rough math on that, and basically it's a lot of energy. This news comes just a day or so after the previous after the previous announcement that Nvidia are potentially not going to be utilizing HBM2 for their GTX 1080 lineups. Now instead, they're going to potentially be using GDDR5X, and we should see a release date around the second quarter of this year. If you want more information about that, go ahead and check the links in the video description. Now, let's move over to the second piece of news, second company piece of news, which is Nvidia. And that would be CUDA. So, I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with what CUDA is and how it works and what the functionality is for, but I'm gonna quickly go into it just in case you're not 100% certain. CUDA, by the way, the acronym stands for Compute Unified Device Platform, and unified is the operative word. It is essentially another black box from Nvidia, in that it's vendor specific. It will only work across vendor specific. In this case simply means that of course you won't be able to run it on AMD's hardware or Intel's hardware or any other company. Now, that does have some benefits, however, developing in the CUDA language. Primarily, it's very, very, very well documented, and there are a lot of high quality tutorials out there. Nvidia supports it rather robustly, and I will say that if you're developing certain applications, it's very, very tempting to go along with Nvidia's architecture, because essentially it's pretty damn strong. But there are some drawbacks with it, and that is if you ever want to change hardware in the future, or you want to send your project to someone else, that type of stuff, you're pretty much locked in, which isn't ideal. Now, what is the solution? Well, a new company, fairly new company, called Otoy, that is O-T-O-Y, has claimed to be able to basically provide a solution. Now, it does have some drawbacks. Essentially, it requires the original source code. What this means is that if I write a CUDA application and compile it in, compile that application and send it to you in CUDA. So if I provide you the source code, which is written in CUDA, basically let's just make it really easy and just say that I send you the entire project written in CUDA, and you have everything you need, you can convert it with their application. If, however, I decide to give you the compiled version, this for the sake of easy point of view here, let's just say the compiled application is like an exe or whatever you're doing, you're screwed. You can't convert it. Now, that isn't to say that this isn't still a very positive step in the right direction. The biggest issue is that the company, Otoy, don't necessarily plan on releasing a standalone version of the software to do this. Instead, they're basically bundling it in with the Octane rendering engine from version 3.1 or above. Now, you might say to yourself, yeah, but how bad is the performance going to be hit, right? You might say to yourself, well, okay, I'm going to convert this code. What's the performance penalty? Is it going to be written messily? Are there going to be some sacrifices made? Is it going to run like 20% slower? No. From what we can tell, Urbach, who is the CEO of the company, stated that no, performance is going to run the same. It's going to be native. So equivalently, if you have a card that runs at 100% on AMD and 100% on NVIDIA, let's say, in other words, their performance is equal, then there's going to be no speed difference on the code, which is converted on either card. And better still, you're going to be able to also run this on CPUs. Now, obviously, CPUs have problems. They're not going to be able to run the massive levels of parallel workload that a GPU can. But still, the fact of the matter is, if your project lended itself to this, you could still do that, which is quite interesting. Now, this isn't the first time that the CUDA language as a whole has actually come under attack. No, AMD have also had their fingers in the pie, and that would be from Boltzmann initiative, and this is something we covered last year. Essentially, it works very different. With Otoy, theirs works in OpenCL, whereas the Boltzmann initiative includes a HIP application, and this allows you to convert CUDA code to native C++, which does have some significant benefits. One of the easiest ones, rather, is that C++ and CUDA are written very much similarly. This means that you can essentially be pretty much up and running with your application. You can understand how it works, and there is an awful lot of libraries and stuff that you can use, and it just basically still means that it's multi-vendor. Once again, the key here isn't that, well, I'm converting it and screw you NVIDIA. No, it's just basically saying, no, we're just unlocking the door and letting anyone use this software, which is really handy if you've written a piece of software but then you want to spread it out to a wider audience. You want more people involved on open source compute projects, that type of thing, and you want to say, hey, we need more people to be able to run this, or we need more people to help calculate the results, whatever. Or it could even be that you work on, let's say, 2 computers, but, you know, I'm at the point now where I need to expand, I need to upgrade, and maybe AMD provide a better solution. Maybe it's more cheaper for what the amount of money you've got, whatever it is, and therefore you're not tied in anymore to one platform. NVIDIA are pretty protective of their IPs, and that's me being quite generous. We all know about GameWorks. GameWorks has come under fire actually over the last year or so. Essentially, it's being called a black box. What this means is that certain companies are, of course, placing I guess you could say, code from GameWorks, and they're utilizing GameWorks for certain effects, but it has negative impact on the game's performance. One of the most infamous, of course, would be, well, Batman Arkham Knight, but most recently you've got problems of Gears of War Ultimate Edition, and it's just not good. Now, we can go all day into the ins and outs of GameWorks, and I understand why NVIDIA are pretty protective of their technology, because obviously it is an awful lot of research that the company have done. But I also don't necessarily think, from the perspective of developers and us as gamers, that it's the best way to have this, I guess you could say, a fence between what they are doing and what developers are doing. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, that's also an article if you want to go ahead and check out some PDFs and slides and all that jazz. But hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, give the likey, sharey thing, and subscribey thing as well if you've not already done so. But for now, I'm going to get going. Take care. Bye for now.